Have you noticed your grocery bill creeping up lately? Maybe your car payment feels heavier than it should. Or maybe you want to buy new appliances and thought, wait, that can't be right. You're not imagining it. And today, I'm going to tell you exactly why everything is getting more expensive and how much more your family is actually paying because of one single policy decision. You're listening to Converts, your guide to currency, crypto, and conversions. I'm here to break down the real-world cost of Trump's 10% global tariff, what it means for your wallet, your groceries, your next car, and even whether you can afford to buy a home this year. Let's get into it. So here's what happened. On February 24th, 2026, President Trump signed an executive order placing a 10% tariff on nearly all imports coming into the United States. We're talking about goods from almost every country on the planet. Europe, Asia, South America, Africa. Basically, if it's made overseas and shipped here, it now costs more at the border. Now, this wasn't the administration's first attempt at sweeping tariffs. Just 4 days earlier, on February 20th, the Supreme Court actually struck down the previous round of tariffs that were imposed under something called IEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. The court said no, you can't use an emergency powers law to restructure global trade. And here's the thing. The administration pivoted within hours. Not days. Hours. They dusted off a different legal authority called Section 122 of the Trade Act. It's an obscure provision that lets the president impose tariffs to address large and serious balance of payments deficits. It was basically a backup plan ready to go. But here's the catch with Section 122. And this is important. It has a built-in expiration. These tariffs can only last 150 days. So do the math. February 24th plus 150 days puts us at July 24th, 2026. That's the legal deadline. After that, these tariffs either need congressional approval to continue or they go away. So we're in this window right now where the tariffs are active, prices are rising, and there's a ticking clock in the background. And I want to put something in perspective here. The effective tariff rate in the United States right now is the highest it has been since 1947. 1947. That's nearly 80 years ago. We're talking about tariff levels that haven't been seen since the post-World War II era, when the global economy was literally being rebuilt from the ground up. We've spent decades building free trade agreements, lowering barriers, integrating supply chains across borders, and in one executive order, we've jumped back to mid-century trade policy. Okay, so let's talk about what this actually costs you. Because this isn't abstract economics. This hits your bank account directly. The Yale Budget Lab. And these are nonpartisan economists at Yale University. They crunched the numbers. And they found that the average American family is paying somewhere between $1,300 and $1,700 more per year because of these tariffs. That's not a projection for someday in the future. That's right now. Let me break that down into categories so you can feel it. Cars. If you're buying a new car, you're paying about $3,300 more than you would have a year ago. That's because so many car parts, engines, transmissions, electronics, are manufactured overseas and assembled here. The tariff hits every single component that crosses the border. Groceries. We're seeing the biggest spike in grocery prices since 2022. And if you remember 2022, that was already painful. Coffee, produce, seafood, packaged goods. So much of what fills your fridge has an import component somewhere in the supply chain. Even domestically grown food gets more expensive when the equipment, packaging, and transportation costs go up. And housing, this one might surprise you. The average new home now costs about $9,200 more to build. Lumber from Canada, fixtures, hardware, appliances, all of it. If you were on the edge of affording a new home, this might be the thing that pushes it out of reach. For the full product-by-product cost breakdown, head to the article on converts.app. We've got tables showing exactly which goods are hit hardest and by how much. Now here's the part that really gets to me. These tariffs don't hit everyone equally. Not even close. If you're in the bottom 20% of income earners, and that's tens of millions of American families, you're paying about 6.2% of your total income toward these tariff-driven price increases. 6.2%. When you're already stretching every dollar, Losing over 6% of your income to higher prices is devastating. Meanwhile, if you're in the top 1% of earners, the tariff cost works out to about 1.7% of your income. Still real money, but it's not going to change your lifestyle. That's the definition of a regressive tax. The people who can least afford it pay the highest share. And the numbers back this up in a really sobering way. Economists estimate that between 650,000 and 875,000 additional Americans will be pushed into poverty because of these tariffs. Let that sink in. Nearly 1 million people who were just barely getting by, now falling below the poverty line because everyday goods cost more. So what about the bigger economic picture? Because tariffs don't just raise prices. They ripple through the entire economy. GDP growth has essentially been cut in half. We went from solid growth in 2024 to sluggish growth in 2026. Businesses are pulling back on investment because they don't know what the trade landscape is going to look like 6 months from now. That 150-day clock on Section 122 creates uncertainty, and uncertainty is poison for business planning. Inflation is another huge piece of this. Here's something interesting. In 2025, when the first rounds of tariffs were hitting, businesses actually absorbed about 80% of the cost increases themselves. They ate into their margins to keep prices stable for consumers. But they can't do that forever. In 2026, the math has flipped. Businesses are now passing through about 80% of the costs to consumers and only absorbing 20%. That's why you're feeling it so much more now than you did last year. The buffer is gone. And it's not just about what's happening inside our borders. The dollar itself has taken a beating. In the first half of 2025, the US dollar lost 10.7% of its value against a basket of major currencies. That is the worst 6-month performance for the dollar in over 50 years. Half a century. Think about what that means if you're traveling, if you're buying anything priced in foreign currency, or if you're a business that imports materials. Right now, the euro is trading at around $1.22. The British pound is sitting near $1.35. If you're planning any international travel or sending money overseas, these exchange rates matter a lot. And by the way, you can track all of these currency movements in real time on converts.app. We cover every major currency pair, so you always know where rates stand. Now let's zoom out even further. Because America didn't impose these tariffs in a vacuum, other countries hit back hard. China was the first to retaliate. Before the truce was reached, China had slapped tariffs as high as 125% on American goods. 125%. That essentially shut down trade in certain categories between the world's 2 largest economies. Canada retaliated. The European Union retaliated. And every round of retaliation means American exporters, farmers, manufacturers, tech companies lose access to foreign markets. So it's not just that imports cost more. Our exports suffer too. American jobs that depend on selling goods overseas are directly threatened. Think about American farmers. They grow soybeans, corn, pork, huge export industries. When China slaps 125% tariffs on those products, demand from the world's biggest market evaporates overnight. Those farmers don't just lose a customer. They lose the customer. And farming isn't like a tech startup where you can just pivot. You've already planted the crops. You've already raised the livestock. The costs are sunk. This is the trade war spiral that economists have been warning about for years. One side raises tariffs, the other side matches or exceeds them, and everyone ends up worse off. The only winners are the governments collecting tariff revenue, and even that's debatable when you factor in the economic slowdown. So where does this leave us? What should you actually do with this information? First, understand the timeline. July 24th, 2026 is the expiration date for these Section 122 tariffs. That's about 4 months away. If Congress doesn't act to extend them, and there's no guarantee they will, prices on imported goods could start coming back down in the second half of the year. Second, if you're making a big purchase, a car, appliances, construction materials, it might be worth thinking about timing. If these tariffs expire in July, prices on certain imported goods could start easing in the fall. That doesn't mean you should put your life on hold. But if you have flexibility on when to buy, it might save you real money. On the flip side, some price increases won't come back down even if tariffs expire. Once supply chains shift and companies renegotiate contracts, some of those higher costs get baked in permanently. Third, keep an eye on the dollar. A weak dollar means your purchasing power is eroding even beyond the tariff impact. If you're converting currencies, traveling, or investing internationally, the exchange rate environment right now is one of the most volatile we've seen in decades. Converts.app is a solid resource for staying on top of those movements. And finally, this affects all of us, but it doesn't affect all of us equally. If you know people who are struggling with rising prices, understand that this isn't just about personal spending habits or budgeting better. There are structural forces at play that are making life more expensive for the people who can afford it least. Nearly 1 million Americans potentially falling into poverty because of trade policy. That's not a personal finance problem. That's a systemic one. I'd also encourage you to share this episode with someone who might not follow economic news closely. A lot of people feel the squeeze but don't understand where it's coming from. Knowledge is power, and understanding what's driving these price increases helps you make better decisions for your family. That's it for today's episode. For the full article with all the details, head to converts.app. And if you found this helpful, subscribe wherever you're listening. Until next time.